I have the privilege of being teacher and principal and second mom to so many students at PUC Prep. And for me, the most rewarding, what I've grown and learned spiritually is that power of with. What joy it is to be with them as they discover their voice and their authentic self, holding their hand as they do that and watching them come into their own and stand on their own 2 feet. Nothing better.
That she cooks with me.
She loves absolutely everyone else. All of her kids at school and our family and her friends. She just loves everyone and shows them that she cares through food and through giving so much of her time and energy.
She's nice.
When I'm hurt, she takes care of me.
I love that my mom loves without boundaries. She's always inviting other people into our family. She loves us regardless of what we do. She's superhuman and takes care of us on top of everything else, and she's also a spiritual rock in our family.
I think one thing that I like about Mom is that whenever we go somewhere or do something, there will be like some small surprise that she has planned or something that we don't know about that we'll find once we get there, or that will always be done. It's always a sweet surprise.
She cooks very yummy food.
I love that she shows her love through action,
She sees strength in everyone around her, has an extremely kind heart.
She does things that I love. Hangs up my towel for me.
Tolerated me.
We know that she loves us because she puts up what she 10-minute hugs.
I have that she makes us food as well. She also pushes me as an individual. She checks up on me even when she's very busy.
Because she got a bee out of our house at supper.
Because she brought me into this world.
I know she loves me because ever since I've been little, she's been carting me around to 1,000,001 activities. And she sends, since I've been in college, she sends me these boxes that are really thoughtfully created with the snacks that I like that I don't have near me, and small things like napkins for different holidays. And we talk absolutely all the time on the phone about sometimes absolutely nothing.
When I need hope, she actually helps me.
Because she hugs and kisses me.
And that's how I know my mom's.
Love you, Mom.
Love you, Ma.
Happy Mother's Day.
Hi, I'm Raywin Orlich, Associate Pastor at the La Sierra University Church, and this is baby Eric, who was born 6 weeks ago today. Let's bow our heads for a word of prayer. Oh God, we come before you from our homes, from wherever we are in this moment. And Lord, I just want to start by thanking you for the mothers in our lives. Thank you for the ways that we've been nurtured and those that have mothered us. God, we thank you for the ways that you mother us and nurture us and grow us. Lord, some of us this weekend may be mourning the loss of a mother or struggling with difficult relationships with our mothers, or perhaps our own journey in mothering and the disappointments and challenges. We pray for healing in all those ways. And Lord, may we individually and as a community be a source of light in our community, a source of healing, a source of nurture. For we pray in Jesus' name, amen.
Good morning. I thought that we would do something a little different for Mother's Day, and so I invited my friend of over 15 years. I keep count. She doesn't. Um, she is a professor and also an ordained minister, and her name is Marlene. Marlene, thank you so much for being with us. She's going to share with us her journey into motherhood. And so thanks for being willing to do this. I know you're very busy. And it was in the time where she wasn't with you. So
yeah, we have to do this when my daughter's not with me. But I'm glad to be with you. I'm just sorry that, we're doing this through Zoom. And as all Zoom meetings kind of go, I'm getting text messages and things popping up on my screen. And it's really different than being like in a sanctuary talking with your congregation and really being able to be together. So there's always kind of that lament, but we make do with what we've got.
yeah. And we both have our digital screens behind us.
That's right.
You don't see the mess of our house.
Right. That's right.
So let's jump right in. You recently adopted a young girl, and so I'll kind of let you tell a little story. Just tell us a little introduction about your experience.
Oh, sure. Well, before we start talking about her, actually, I'm going to show you. I'm really proud of my Zoom skills.
Okay, you gonna screen share?
Yeah, exactly. For two reasons. One is you need a face first to talk about a person, right? And then second of all, because, I had to move all my courses online in 2 weeks, and I've learned like just a few things I can do on Zoom, and I like to use my skills. So let me show you a picture of my daughter.
Okay.
All right.
Oh my gosh, I haven't seen this one.
Yeah. So this was actually taken in December of 2019. This is Sheen. Ferreras, because I gave her my last name. Sheen is a name that she was given at her orphanage. Her name was Xin Yi, and then her last name, which I really have a hard time pronouncing in Mandarin, is actually the Mandarin word for stone, which is the same last name as my sister's married name. So it was really great since we felt like, oh, she was always meant to be, whatever. But then since I gave her my last name, and I did want to keep her, some of her rootedness in China, because it's something to lament, and there's this there's this mixed feeling of starting a family in the midst of like grief and trauma when you do adoption. And there's joy for sure, but it's just an intense feeling, and in my case, I adopted her from China, so I was also taking her from her home country, and I wanted her to have things that linked her. And names are so important to me. So anyway, I took that last name of Stone and did like a full day's worth of research, which won't surprise you, Josie.
No.
To see like what name can I come up with that has roots in China, that's still linked to this name that they gave her at the orphanage, all her ayis gave her. So anyway, I came up with jade, which is a stone of significance. For one, its healing properties. Within Chinese culture, it's believed that like the stone of jade helps with like, I think it was like intestinal or something with your stomach, and people wear it quite a bit for healing, and it has some religious connotations as well. And of course, the Jade Emperor and all that kind of stuff. And she's an empress. Look at her.
Yes, she is. She's owning the entire world. So
Right.
just a quick, just a quick few stories. So I've had the honor and the privilege of being able to face every week, and then also getting to visit her when I would go down south. And she is one of the most confident young ladies that I've ever met. I did not know that there was someone that could be two and so strong. I just feel like she, like, don't let an intruder come into your house. She will take care of them before they get into mommy's, bedroom. Like, I just think that she is a force to be reckoned with, and she is so much fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, and I play with a lot of kids, but she's like one of my favorites.
And she definitely has preferences. When I went into the adoption process, they told me, a lot of the kids, they're very stoic and they don't really they're very accommodating until they get comfortable, and then they start really like
showing them,
giving you their full emotions. And I was like, oh, it's like she was, she had that moment, that first day where she was very just like
one day.
and stiff.
Yeah.
Because she was scared.
Yeah. Yeah.
But even in that stiff, scared state that she was in, the acute trauma of being taken from her caregivers, whom she'd been with for 15 months, she had her preferences known. Like even that first day, right? Like she didn't want to play, she didn't want to do a whole lot of things, but she was like, I don't like this milk. I gotta have milk. When I took her to go to bed, she was like, don't touch me. Why are we in the same bed? I was like, let me build a pillow barricade. Fair enough. Like, we don't know each other. I will throw the bottle into your side of the bed. Is that okay? Let me know if it's warm or cool enough, So yeah, she's got this really just big personality, really, strong kid. And it has served her. It has served her. She's 3 now, and it has just really brought her through the experience of being internationally adopted. And also, because she lives with a chronic condition, and she's a chronic transfusion patient that needs transfusions every 3 weeks to sustain life. She has this rare genetic blood disorder called thalassemia, which is actually quite common in southern China. And in other parts of the world. I know in Africa, in the Mediterranean, and parts of Asia. that include India and so forth. There's a high incidence of thalassemia. And, um, you know, when she was in the orphanage, she was going to these transfusions with her IEs, but they weren't as frequent.
And I is
An IE, yeah, sorry, see?
oh, it's okay.
That's my learning of Mandarin. I can pronounce correctly, but yeah, an IE is an auntie, but they call the nannies that. Yeah, yeah. So the nannies would go with her, but in China, a transfusion can take a whole day. Blood shortages are a real thing there. So when you're an orphan and there's lots of orphans with the condition, you wait until your hemoglobin is concerningly low. Not just low needing it, but you know, if we don't give it to you, then you could have another condition or, your life is at risk type deal. And they wait because they're sharing and it has nothing to do with the quality of care in China. It's just it's an effect of we have so many kids we want to care for and limited resources, and this is how we're going to make the best out of what we've got. So
yeah, and I think that's really helpful. I think when we hear that something's different from what we're used to, we'll judge it and we'll say, "Oh, how could people possibly live in those kinds of circumstances?" So I think it's helpful to remember that no, you don't need to go there.
Yeah.
And I know that going for you, like this must have been a journey even for you when you finally got word that this was going through and you got your date and you had to start getting your plane tickets and all of that. What was going on for you?
Yeah. So I should probably start that by saying that I've always wanted to be a parent, which is strange because I actually don't like little kids. You know that. I like them if I can give them back. But I was a youth pastor for longer than I was a children's pastor. And I actually enjoyed being a children's pastor, but I enjoyed that role of like, I'm in the sense that I'm like a spiritual parent to you and I play with you and I support you. And when you get in trouble by your parents, I'm there to kind of be like, hey, I'm in this with you, but I'm not that like authoritative sort of caregiver that's there 24/7. However, I did want to have the experience of parenting someone, and I'm somebody who really values relationship. And I didn't find any romantic relationship that was good, but that didn't mean that I was then gonna not find other ways of making this parenting thing happen for me. So one of the life plans I've always had is, and this is very much influenced by my own mother, because I come from a long line of strong women from Cuba. Even though I adopted a strong woman from China, she landed in a great spot. My mother always told me, you be your own breadwinner, you finish all of your education, and then you have a family. So anyway, I had thought when I finished my PhD, this is when I'm gonna start family. And the more and more it started looking like, I don't have good partnership, which I didn't. I started looking into the potentials of how can I be a parent, and there were specific ways I wanted to be a parent. I looked into the foster care system because I think there's a beautiful ministry as well. And I would have gone that route had it not been for the things I know about my everyday life, meaning that I am a pretty busy person. I tend to travel quite a bit. Meeting all of the guidelines that foster care would have for me wouldn't allow me to like spend time in publishing and teaching and traveling. And so anyway, to make a long story short, while I went through that process, I finally came to the conclusion of, I can do foster care later, which yes, I'm putting that out there. Like I would love to be a mom through foster care. And maybe you never know, right? I could open up a house and have tons of kids. Um, not right now, but okay. So once I decided that was not going to work, then I looked into international adoption. And when I looked into international adoption, I kind of carried some of the same values. I want a kid who really can use all of my resources and who needs a parent, someone to tie their life to, or who will tie their lives to them, that will be mutually beneficial for both of us. So while now I can speak very specifically, while Sheen fills for me that longing and desire to parent and to also live a relational life with a family that I've constructed in myself, which, by the way, she's the theological construction I'm most proud of. Among all the other theological things that I've written and read, right? And done, because theology is also what we do, right? This feels something for me, but it also gives her a lot of things that she needs to empower her to do the things she needs to be. So in very concrete ways, what it was an act of solidarity with our parts, right? And even though she was 2 when I adopted her, because I adopted her a year ago, and she might not have.
Just for word clarification now and again, an act
sorry.
of solidarity. Can you just, if everyone doesn't know what that means?
Yeah. And what I mean by an act of solidarity, and I take my notions of solidarity from a practical theologian, Sharon Thornton, who writes the book Broken Yet Beloved. And she describes solidarity as making yourself vulnerable with and alongside someone who's marginalized, or someone who is at risk for losing their life, or their life is just really, there's another word, precarious. It's really delicate. It's hanging in a balance where like they need something that you have, and you're willing to give what you have unrestrained, in the sense that you're willing to stand in the same vulnerabilities as the person you are tying to. So in that way, like the object-subject relationship that generally our charity models and practices are shaped around is destroyed, because now we're both becoming vulnerable, and that's an act of solidarity.
So object subject, meaning I'm the giver and you're
right, because I have riches and you're the receiver, right. And you get to have this beautiful life because I'm giving it to you.
Aren't you so lucky?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of problems with that are philosophical and theological and all that kind of deal, because it doesn't feel good to be on the other end of that. I mean, I don't know if you or people in your congregation have ever been in a relationship like that, but when you're objectified in that way, and you have to live a life of gratitude, not grateful for things that you're organically grateful for, but grateful because you ought to be grateful, because you're constantly reminded for the ways in which the only reason you live and breathe is because of this relationship you have to this subject, right? To this individual or institution or whatever that's giving it to you. That doesn't feel good. And also that's a bit dehumanizing.
Yeah, it's very controlling. It's
right.
Like somebody has like the need that is being fulfilled is the need to be in a position of power or control. Yeah. And so, yeah. And there's, how can you be in a relationship with a child that's healthy and constantly tell them you need to think this way, you need to act this way, you need to, although there's a little bit of that, like, you better stop.
I mean, there's boundaries and there's parenting, right? But in my parental relationship with her, if we were to think about it theologically, right, I do think about it more in terms of a practice of solidarity more than like an all-powerful God with
which would be you,
the subject, yeah, which would be me, with subjects being like other humans who are dependent on that God for life and for love and for food. I I don't find that to be very
Helpful.
meaningful or
Yeah.
helpful. Yeah.
Well, and because then one person is always better than the other, and then they're adults and you're like, oh, I saved them from all of this, and it's like, yeah, I'm so
And that's
lucky.
not true. And it's actually not true. And if we pause to really hear the voices of children who've been adopted, whether it's through, I mean, there's all kinds of different ways that kids can be adopted. But if you listen really carefully to the experiences of adoptees, you'll hear them talk about how that kind of theology, the charitable theology, has been hurtful to them, and they have felt unseen. So I read enough to help me
I
start
think
thinking.
that your screen is very reflective of your everyday life and everything that I've known about you. You are a great resource because you read so much.
And she will surprise me, right? Because no matter how much I read, every kid's different. And she, she's pretty sassy, so she'll probably let me know. And of course, that's also a trait that I nurture in her too, right? So.
What has been the biggest home, like, so coming into your home, what has been the biggest change in your everyday life at home?
So everything has changed. First of all, like, she was supposed to come after I defended my dissertation and in the fall of 2019. And I ended up getting her filed December of 2019. I wonder if I have the picture on my, I have a picture of her, but there's one picture where she's writing with a pencil. And that's the one that the agency sent.
Oh, I remember seeing that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, I didn't know anything about her other than what was in 18 pages of a translated document in this photo. And I was like, that's my girl. Like, I could just see the fire in her eyes. And for whatever reason, that picture spoke to me. Like, she's writing and I'm in the middle of like
my dissertation,
like finishing literally the last draft of my dissertation. And so I'm like, oh, this is the epilogue to my dissertation. There she is.
So can we take a little bit of a rabbit trail? What did you end up writing your dissertation on?
I wrote my dissertation on a local theology of women who were working on the assembly line of a multinational corporation in Mexico. And what I studied was the theology that arises from them and how it assists them to resist systems of violence and oppression for the sake of informing pastoral caregivers.
Okay, you were just talking about, I'm in the middle of writing my dissertation, but I think it's helpful to know and kind of give us a bigger picture of what were you doing? You're literally traveling to and from Mexico.
Right. So yeah, that's a really good point. So I was looking at transnational ties and flows of economies, but also how what we do in the US or anywhere in the world, right, impacts and is tied to the lives of others around the globe. And, case in point, we're living through COVID-19, right? Yeah. And we're very much learning how connected the whole world is by force, right? That something can't happen in isolation and not actually have repercussions for how people live and the quality of people's lives and the health and well-being of not just individuals, but also the earth, right? Yeah. And the more we pollute and we contribute to the production of death through practices of death, we are actually bringing that upon ourselves. Yeah. So yeah, I was studying these women's spirituality in a tiny pueblo in Mexico and going back and forth between the US and Mexico. And for a time I was rooted in Mexico for like, I don't know, what was it, like 6 months or something like that. And when I was at home writing, right, I was writing and thinking about how intimately connected life and death are, right? And that practices of resurrection are centered around, you know, the awareness of I'm dying. We can all say I'm dying,
Mhm.
and in the same breath, we are also, you know, living.
Right.
So, and part of our resistance is how do we stay alive? How do we live vibrant lives? How does hope arise, and how is it topological? What I mean by topological is like, how is it rooted in place? How is hope arising from what we do every day with one another, so that when things look really bleak and there looks like, you know, the future that you wanted is not materializing, how do you keep yourself afloat, right? And
Which
so
is
as I'm
great, I'm like, which is a great topic for us. Oh my gosh, I just did a Dr. Teal.
oh no.
That honors his memory. He was one of our professors, and he used to do that all the time. But which is really important for us even right now, because how do we thrive in the midst of the grief that we're experiencing, because everything in our life has changed. And then I also see us having one conversation, but three conversations, because this is what you were doing in your project, but this is also directly impacting, you know, the work would be helpful as we understand what's happening with us now, while you're telling the story of how everything in your life has changed once Shin had entered into your home. Like, I know your living room is not your own. You have one couch, and the rest belongs to her.
The whole house pretty much does. But it's also so as I'm writing and these files are coming through, the way that I've reflected on that experience and what occurred was an invitation from God to live more fully into some of the ideas that I was committing to paper. And I think that's significant in the sense that as Christians, just in general, right, we have beliefs that we hang on to, some of them that are deeply embedded, that we've inherited by virtue of being born into the Seventh-day Adventist Church, or actually, that have also been shaped by our communities, by our families, by our educational system as we were growing up, right? But when we begin to make when we begin to really analyze what we believe based off of what we do, and to question ourselves and saying, okay, if we take a step back, right, and we reflect on our doings, then we can really pose some critical questions to ourselves to say, do I really believe that? Because if I believed that, then maybe I would behave differently, or I would make different choices. I would choose different risks, right? So in this whole adoption process and becoming a parent, one in that whole mix, right? One of the things that I found myself experiencing was an invitation from God to step into some of these ideas that I'd committed to paper, that I stated were part of my belief systems, right? So for example, right, I just explained what solidarity was. I believe in solidarity. I think that hospitality is something that I value as a Seventh-day Adventist Christian. Well, do you want to sign the dotted line and become a parent to a 2-year-old from China with a chronic illness, who, by the way, after I signed those papers, a month later, I think it was February 6th, so maybe it was 2 months later, February 6th, I get an emergency communication from the central office in China saying that my daughter's hemoglobin's at 5, right?
And what is it supposed to be at?
Oh, it's supposed to be at least like 10, 11. That's like the very least. But you have, there can be complications to low hemoglobin. It affects your other organs in your body. Like you can die basically, right? So I get this communication, and I'd already stepped into this invitation from God, and that's the way that I conceptualize it and also language it in a story that I guess one day I'll tell her. but that I tell about the adoption process, right? This invitation to be her parent. And I didn't know, right? I'm going to go to China now, like I have to put my dissertation defense on hold. I had to actually reschedule it. Go to China and pick up a little girl and bring her to my home in really I mean, I knew some things about her medical condition, but not that much. And being a single parent by choice, I'm putting all of my assets, financial and otherwise, right, in a very vulnerable state, right? And that's another way of living into these values, right? To really asking myself just how big or even what are how would I describe what it means to be a Christian and to practice hospitality and solidarity?
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
So in that way, I think that some of the main changes to my life have also been theological reframing of beliefs that I've lived into, that have invited me to live into like the big questions of Christianity and of life, right? So that I'm not just walking around with like some creedal statement, but I'm every day theologically reflecting on how I live out, right, the gospel, and how we live out the gospel, because it's not just me, right? It's also my daughter's act of hospitality. She doesn't have to accept me. Um, it's a forced migration that was thrown upon her, but she can arrive to my house and decide that she doesn't want this. So even though I can't have rational conversations with her, I am seeing her practice her own form of hospitality toward me.
Yeah. I think that sometimes we in our minds think that children are not individuals.
Mm-hmm.
And when we treat children, they are, or when we talk about children, they belong to.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there is someone that is meant to or is called to care for them, which is extremely important, and that they're safe and in safe places. That's the responsibility of the caretaker. But there's also this sense of, I hear you saying, I want her to know that she is her own person, and I want to help her live into the person that she is becoming, guiding and forming, of course, but she doesn't need to be what I think she needs to be. Like, I get to help her flourish in what's already inside of her.
Right. That's really well said. I think who she is in her. And what I'm trying to do is nurture it to see what it is. And some things about it I'll like, and other things I won't. But it goes both ways. She doesn't like everything about me either. And I do have a strong conviction that, that God places callings in our own lives, and that, we're all spiritual beings, and we are privileged in whatever capacity you're a parent or a mother, that we're privileged to have those kinds of roles with children, or adult children even, or teenage children, whoever we fulfill that mothering role to. And that mothering, this was another thing that came out of my dissertation, that mothering is the production of life. But it's not like in terms of that biological birthing process. It's not limited to that, right? Because that's really amazing and that's great for people. But I know women who biologically birth and they don't mother. they birth. But mothering for me is birthing. In other words, like making what are the elements that need to surround this individual or this community or this group so that they can have the conditions to thrive, right? And that to me is what parenting and mothering is, and that's what we're celebrating this weekend, without forgetting the many women who have a strong desire to have a biological child and can't, and this is a weekend for them in which they grieve infertility. For other women who are single and really desire to have biological children, and for a number of reasons that has not materialized for them, I think it's good for us to acknowledge that and honor it. And at the same time, I think it's really essential that our faith communities not make the definition of mothering or parenting so narrow that it creates grief or further alienates individuals who don't fit that very narrow definition. Because, like I said, in my own research with the women who I talked with in Mexico, and it's in my dissertation, the way they described mothering and the way they understood themselves was, we are mothers, but we're mothers not because of our biological children. We're the mothers of the pueblo. We're the mothers of the children whose parents have died. We're the mothers of the woman across the road who she worked so many hours at the assembly, on the assembly line, that we mostly, raise her children in solidarity with her, right? And there's this like communal raising of children. And in that vein, I should also say that I feel like I'm co-parenting with a woman in China whom I don't know, and who I imagine loved her child very much. Yet poverty led her to make choices that some of us who don't live in those kinds of situations
don't ever have to face that.
You don't have to face that choice, right?
To make that choice, yeah.
Right. So there are some of us that just, even if we biologically birth a child, if we live in a particular set of conditions, economically especially, if our child has a chronic condition, we just find ourselves making unimaginable, unthinkable choices that perhaps some of us with more wealth would find just unbelievable, right? We'd be like, how could you ever do that? Well, you know what? You've never had to think about the next meal on your table and then look at a little girl and say, every 3 weeks, I can afford a blood transfusion, which in China, you have to pay up front for the transfusion and then you get it. Right?
So I am like, there were times where you just brought me to tears and I'm just like, ah. But it's just so beautiful how this experience has challenging us to rethink about our own relationship in community with each other. What does it mean for us as a church to, as the men and women of our church, to see ourselves as the parents of this church, and to not judge people and say, well, you should just get your kids, should just, keep them quiet, or it's just, hey, that's my child too. We in solidarity are caring for our children. And also challenging us to expand what motherhood looks like, and to make sure that in our celebration of the things that we have, that celebration is done in such a way that we are inclusive and that we don't cause more grief in others who are silently suffering because of things outside of their control.
Right. When I was a children's pastor at Azure Hills, it bothered me to no end, right? So I would always, every chance I got, like, I actually, and you know that I don't like to preach all the time. I asked to give the sermon for Mother's Day. This was, of course, prior to Xinjiang. And I decided that I would
do a sermon on lament, because we never pause to give these moments in our community breath, right? We just, generally, if we were celebrating this in a church setting, at least in the churches that I've been, we ask all the mothers to stand. And in that 2 seconds, right, you have people thinking in their mind, should I stand, should I not? I once had a classmate, this is a really, it's actually an experience that has always stuck with me. I had a classmate at Claremont during my PhD work, who said this, and it has never left. So she had lost her, I think it was a 7-year-old to cancer. And it was her only child. And so she asked in class, I can't remember what passage in Judges we were translating, but we were translating a text in Judges in a class in Hebrew. And she posed the question to the class, so what do you call yourself when you've lost a child that acknowledges the loss of that child? Because we know what we call women who lose a spouse, they're widows. So even the power to say I'm a widow acknowledges that I had a spouse, right? Right. But when it comes to mothers who, or fathers for that matter, right, who also practice mothering, right? So if I have lost a child, there's no word, at least in the English language, to my knowledge, or even in the Spanish language. So I know it wasn't in the Hebrew text either, right? Like there's no word. And that's actually really something that when she said it, I thought, wow, that's really significant, because I think if I lost a person who I shared a meaningful relationship with, that was a familial tie, similar to marriage, I would want some way to hold that in a social setting, so that when people saw me, they knew I was the mother of whatever the child's name was, or a mother who had buried a child. So anyway, my point was in saying all that is that in 2 seconds, right, in these church settings, when we ask mothers to stand up, we have people who are, in a split 2 seconds, opting out because they don't feel, right, like they can stand. And in the social sciences, right, we call this disenfranchised grief, right? It's grief that isn't given acknowledgement in society, and people suffer and grieve alone. So I think it's really important, as I talk to you about Sheen Sheen, that I recognize that there's a mother halfway across the world who, at different points in time in the year, thinks of her because she loved her, right? She birthed her. The whole gestation period was with her, and it's very obvious if you meet my daughter that even before me, she knew love. So how can we not, right, think about, well, what is all this grieving, and at what points of the year does she grieve because she's not near her? And oh, how I would wish to one day be able to connect with her and say, we've always been in this together, girl, right? Like, it's been you and me. You parented her for one time, I parented her for another, and at the end of the day, like, God has been good, and here she is.
It's so beautiful and so moving, because you hear so many stories about people who will judge the other and just say, oh, I can't believe anybody would give up somebody like this, and because again, it's a circumstance that we would never find ourselves in. We don't know what it's like to live their story. And what a way to honor their story, and to also continue to honor the possibility that she may be curious about that in the future. And I think we could go on and on and on, but I think you've made me cry like 3 times. That's all I can take. But but that is so beautiful. So one of the things that we are working on, and Deborah Murphy is working on this, one of our elders, is we're working with the foster care system. You know, I let the church know I'm, you know, going through all of the process so that I can, you know, work with the foster system as well, and have talked to a couple other church members to see if they would be willing to go through the process of also becoming foster parents. And for those who aren't at that place, trying to instill the idea of not everyone can be a foster parent, but everyone can help. And I do think that adoption is, and fostering and all of that stuff is living out a calling of Christianity, is one way of doing that. And I just am so grateful for your vulnerability and for you sharing our story. And I think that this is very powerful. So thank you, Marlene, for being here. Yeah.
You.
I hope this has also been meaningful to you. And this Mother's Day weekend, some of you may not be able to be with the mother figures in your life. But I'm sure that you are calling them and FaceTiming them or emailing them. And for those of you who had to say goodbye to them, I hope that this is a time where we can honor our mothers by living out the values that they have instilled in us. For those of us who didn't have moms that were good mother figures to us, as we remember those who took their place, like our dads or our grandparents, may this be a time where we remember that we are in this together, that we are mothering our church together, and that we are caring for each other. So thank you so much. Have a great Sabbath.
Well, hello, little baby. Your eyes have never seen the sun. You should know, little baby, that I am the lucky one.
Sophie.
I get to be the one to hold your hand. I get to be the one through birthdays and broken bones. I'll be there to watch you grow. I get to be the one. Don't feel alone now, little baby. Do you hear me singing you a song? I can't wait to show you, little baby, how to crawl, how to walk, and how to run. I get to be the one to hold your hand. I get to be the one through birth.